So, bit of a different video today. I just had woke up and just felt like some things that needed to be said. A lot of people ask me what got me into coaching, and generally the first thing I tend to talk about is my background teaching mathematics and sports and gymnastics, and then obviously mixed martial arts. But haven't really had time to go much more in deep than beyond that. And I think it honestly goes back even further than that. And I think it goes back even when I was a very, very young kid. So if it wasn't obvious from the socially inept and horrific communicational skills, I was homeschooled. And I was homeschooled by a very loving family. And we did a lot of different stuff. And it wasn't just your average homeschooling either, because my dad was a teacher, and his dad before him was a teacher. And I grew up with a father who didn't only care about us, but also knew how to teach and knew how to teach really well. You see, not only was my homeschooling pretty focused on, schooling at home, but it was actually everything. But you see, whenever my dad, he taught public school and private school for several years, and then he actually went on and started his own tutoring and co-op thing where he'd have 25, 30 homeschool kids in a class teaching high school. And I went with him. I went to work with my dad. And I still have a picture here, let me pull this up, of going down every single day to my dad classes, sitting very far in the back, working on my own schoolwork, and honestly listening to my dad teach. And something that my dad did very well, two things. He always incorporated us into whatever that we did, whether it was sports or work. We were always a part of whatever my dad was doing. And the second thing that my dad did to complement that is that my dad taught really, really well. And my dad didn't just teach things in a way that was understandable, but was also enjoyable. And he was a friend to every kid that he ever worked with. And I still have many, many memories of dozens and dozens and dozens of kids over the years that developed very meaningful relationships with my dad. And my dad was very supportive of them when they were going through really tough times. And that's something that stood out to me, is my dad was not only a really fun, funny, and engaging guy, he was a good teacher, and he was a good friend. And when he coached and taught people, because he also coached sports too, it wasn't just about making relationships to get them better at what they're doing, but he served a purpose way beyond that. And I think that's something that not only sat with me, but inspired me to coach and teach the way that I do. The many times I catch myself coaching and teaching and go, it's just my dad coming out of my mouth, the way that I'm coaching, the way that I'm teaching, the sense of humor, the corny jokes, the self-deprecation. How do you say that? Self-deprecatory? Anyway, there's a little bit of the homeschooler coming out. But it went beyond that. Me and my dad did a lot of other things. We went on field trips. I have a picture of when we went on to visit the Grand Canyon, this big science trip that we did with my grandfather, who was actually a science teacher for at least 40 years. He actually worked with SeaWorld way, way, way back in the day. My grandfather did, and we went to the Grand Canyon, and honestly, just the whole trip was equal parts fun to see the sights. Arizona was honestly one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been to, one of the most beautiful places, but also just spending time with my dad. And that was something that a lot of people, I think, I count myself lucky, because I know a lot of people look back and, oh, I wish I'd done more. I wish I'd been a better parent. I don't know that my dad has those regrets. I know that whenever I think back and I look back, I know that I got to spend a lot of time with my father, and it changed me as a person. And it made me want to do the same for other people. And I didn't know it yet. I remember my dad used to talk to me a lot and go, maybe one day when you're old enough, you'll take over my classes and teach for me. And I remember at the time, especially when you're like 12, 13 years old, you're like, I want to forge my own path. I want to do my own thing. And I guess that's kind of what I'm doing now. But I guess as I got older, I realized that how attractive that possibility was, of being able to kind of teach in his footsteps. And even if it wasn't exactly in the same way, in the same subject, or not necessarily taking over his business, but being able to succeed at that. And right now, my father is finishing up his master's degree and working on developing ways for high schoolers to get college credit, and he's moving towards online and in-person classes, and he's expanding his repertoire. My dad never stops working. My dad built his business from scratch. He's written his own books, and he's the definition of an entrepreneur. But beyond that, I guess we share that sort of ambition, but he's always prioritized taking care of people. And I know right now my family has had some up and downs with financial times. Whenever you're self-employed, you can be very successful, but you can also be very successful and very unsuccessful sometimes. And I know my dad sometimes gets frustrated that, a job and really a craft that he's perfected long ago hasn't paid off in spades. But one thing that it has paid up in is his ability to impact lives and encourage and support people that he's been a part of. And there's just really too many to count. And there's just really so many of them that I don't even know about and never will know about. And that has been the biggest inspiration for me. So beyond that, as I got older, I taught mathematics and got into mixed martial arts. And then that's a whole story to begin with, talking about deer pepper. And I ended up being a head instructor at my own mixed martial arts school. Now, this is a little bit different. Beyond the Belt was a school started by Carl Jung in central New Hampshire and was an offshoot of traditional karate from somebody who realized that, no offense, traditional karate isn't all that useful. It's flashy and fun, but it's not super effective for self-defense. So what we started to incorporate, Carl Jung, many, many years ago, was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing. And what we found was a self-defense studio that we called karate in a way, but really had very little karate at all. It was mostly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and boxing. And what it did steal, though, from the karate style was the belt system, because it was initially a dojo focused for children. And focused on children learning not only how to defend themselves better as they grew into teenagers and to adults, but also focusing on developing values and building families and encouraging children to just grow and mature as people, not only as students. And obviously we expanded beyond that into teenagers and training adults, and the program eventually became a full-fledged children, adults, all ages program. And I got into that and I started head instructing. And I found myself once again walking in my father's footsteps and finding ways not only to work with kids, which was something that I always loved, but work with adults, and most of all, teaching something that was useful and helpful, but also teaching in a way to where I could have relationships with people and assist people and help and support and love people when they needed it and in the ways that they needed it. And one of, if not the most touching moment of my entire career was actually the last thing I ever did with Beyond the Belt. You see, the school, the offshoot sister school that I was head instructor of for several years, ended up closing down, and as I moved into Overwatch. And eventually, even the head school, several hundred students closed down during COVID. And Pepper started her own offshoot, the Phoenix, which is still alive and well today. But my path with Beyond the Belt had finished. And long story short, I came back for the Phoenix. I finished my black belt journey through the Phoenix, through MMA black belt, whatever that may be, with jiu-jitsu and grappling. And I started back training, and it was fun. But long story short, there were two young ladies that I had started training with on the sister school as head instructor. And I had worked with these young ladies for many years. And I had a very, very close relationship with these guys. And one of the very important parts of the black belt ceremony is when you receive your black belt, you take your red black belt, the belt before black belt, and you give it to the person, usually a male figure, that was significant in your journey. And most kids usually give it to their dads, because obviously the dads are very supportive, but sometimes you get something different. And I had the opportunity to give both of these young ladies their black belts. And let me pull up the picture here. And unfortunately, one of them was underage at the time, so just out of respect of the child and her parents, this is one of them. And this is not exactly the most romantic way of presenting it. And this is the other. And these young ladies received their black belts. But the most touching part to me was what happened with both of these young ladies afterwards. And I'll have this moment captured here because it honestly broke me down. Is this young lady managed to share, or chose to share, her belt with me, and she chose to give me her red black belt to signify that I had meant a lot to her during her journey. And it's kind of hard to explain, and it's kind of like an anticlimactic way of describing it, but in the moment, it was just the most important thing that I had ever done in that entire 6-7 years living there and working there. To know that you had really meant that much to somebody and helped them along the journey, it felt like I was actually walking in my dad's footsteps. And it just meant so much. And I guess I've tried to do the best that I could to try and do that with Overwatch as well. And when I started, I guess, the whole Stormcrow Productions thing, I remember sitting in bed and just, praying and thinking, like, God, use this as you will. What can I do to help people, impact people, even if it's in such an unorthodox way? And I have tried to do that as best as I can. And not just with the stupid YouTube channel and the stupid Discord, the one-on-one coaching sessions and the roast coaching. But really more importantly, at least for a long time, was the teams that I worked with, the contenders, before contenders even, all the way up to Overwatch League. And I've really tried to be somebody to help and support and try to be as kind as I could. And I know I've made mistakes. It's hard to be ambitious and still selfless at the same time. It's a hard challenge to try and drive and push and make decisions that are best for the team, but not to consider the individual. And I know that I have made decisions as a coach in the past that may have not been the most competitive decisions, but because it felt like it was the right thing to do. I would rather be accused of somebody who isn't able to win as much, but that somebody knows is a good guy and doing the right thing. To me, that is not the insult of a competitor. There's certain lines that I'm just not willing to cross, and I think maybe that's why I wasn't able to stay in Overwatch League. But I know that I was able to have an impact in some people's lives, and that's meant more to me than any win or loss could ever have. And I still think sometimes one of the most painful pictures to me is this one right here, because it's my boys. And, I got to know a lot of them very well. Some of them I got to know pretty well. But I think the thing that was hardest about the London situation for me, and why it was very frustrating that I was not able to visit, and why obviously the living situation never would have worked out, and why it was just very depressing, is because some of those guys I felt like I had a real big positive impact, but some of them I never really got to know very well. And ultimately, not being there in person, it is very difficult to kind of establish those type of relationships that would have been so much more beneficial for me and them. And I think that's what hurts the most. I think if you ever ask me if I had one regret with Overwatch League, it would be that, and never being able to see these guys that I'd worked with and getting that opportunity. And that still hurts even to this day. But one thing that doesn't hurt is the people that I have helped. And I hope I've helped you guys. As I said earlier, it is hard to try and run a business, to try and be self-employed, to try and, build a brand, but to do so in a way that you don't prioritize just the amount of money you're making. That man-to-man series that I released, I knew it was going to get no views, especially after the first one, but I just felt like somebody might need to hear that. Somebody might. I'm not going to make any money off of it at all, but somebody might need to hear that. And I will continue to make choices like that. It's very important to me, because that's what my dad would have done, and that's what means a lot to me. And I hope that you in the comments reading this or watching this 14 minutes in can think of a time or a person or a place that has had impact on you, because that's the most important thing as a coach or a teacher or anything, is just to treat others decently, to take care of others. And I know I have not been perfect with that. I've made a lot of mistakes, but that is something I'll always strive to do. And I'll share one last image with you guys. I don't know if many of you guys remember Cinder from the Coaching Children video series many years ago. She's still around, and she's growing up fast, and she's rather large now. She's looking like almost a young woman now. It's crazy to me. She was so young, and I still keep in touch with her. I don't play with her as much as I used to, but I still keep in touch with her and her dad. I get Christmas cards. I even got a turkey from them once. And this is the kind of stuff, if this doesn't mean more to you than anything else, then you're missing out. It's not me that's missing out, it's you that's missing out. So chat, I have this habit of saying chat, but I appreciate y'all's support. And I think the big thing for you guys, that if you take nothing away from this video, is try to be special to somebody else. If nothing else, to inspire them to be special to somebody else. Treat others with dignity. And I'm going to do my best to, even if we can continue to grow this channel, wonderful. But even if I'm just barely able to make a living off of this, but I'm able to continue to inspire is such an egotistical word. If I'm just able to encourage and help in any way I can, then that it will be a success. So big shout out to my dad.